Today I'm going to start a playlist where I show how to create this award-winning website by Denis Snellberg. This website has many subtle animations which makes it hard to fit all of them in one video. So I'm going to create a series where I first make all of the components and then a final video where I combine all of them and recreate this site. And for our first video, I'm going to show how to create this button. Now this is the finished version of the button I'm going to make in this video. Notice there are several moving parts here, so let's address them first. First and the most obvious one is the magnetic effect, which you see the button is moving towards my cursor. Not only the button is moving towards my cursor, the content of the button is also moving. It sort of gives this parallax effect animation and it's really cool. The second animation is the blob animation. When you hover over it, the blue background comes from the bottom and moves towards the top side. Not all users prefer using mouse. There are some people who prefer using keyboards, so we have something for them as well. It's just a simple CSS transition. Now this is the basic button where I have applied no animations, just the basic CSS styling, nothing much to show. The only thing I will show is this transition. What I've essentially done is toggling the active class on this button. So when the active class is applied, the two lines will rotate and form an X shape. And also the background will change to blue. So the first animation I'm going to create is the background animation because it's simpler, so I will get it done first. So essentially the blob animation is done using a separate element. We create a div element called blob, add a class of blob to it, and then append the blob to the button. If you are interested in the blob class, I have opened it right here. It has a z index of 1 because we want the lines to be on top of the blob. So the lines have index of 2. It has 150% of the width, 200% of the height, top and left of 50%. We are going to use translate to keep it in the center. Right now it won't be. I'm going to keep the magnet animation and the background animations separate because if I merge them into one function and keep everything inside it, then it will create a giant mess and it will be ugly to maintain. It can also create problems when we are changing one animation and it is affecting the other animation somehow. So it's just best to keep them separate. Let me just show you what the blob looks like. So the blob is essentially a bigger version of our button. If you see, our button is circular, but the blob is egg-shaped because we want this effect to look like it's filling up our button. So what will happen is right now the blob is below the button, and when we hover over it, the blob will move to the center and it will give such an impression that our background is filling from the bottom up. And then when we leave the cursor, the blob will move even up. So it will create an effect which feels like the background is moving upwards. Then the blob will reset to its original position, which is bottom of the button. Now we are going to keep the overflow hidden so we don't show the user this blob. So we are going to create the animation we need for that. But there is one thing we need to change. Because I am using position absolute, I have used translate property to keep the blob in center. So I'm going to remove it from here and use it in GSAP. Now why would I remove it from the CSS? Because every property you change using GSAP will override the property in CSS. So if there are any properties you want to animate in GSAP, you should define them using GSAP. There we go. Now we have our x of minus 50% and y of 25. So if I want to keep the blob just below the button, I need to put the y% as 25 because the blob is twice as big. Normally you would keep at 50% because it's twice as big, you keep 25%, 50 divided by 2. And if I do put 50 here, the element will just move so far down, it will create a jagged animation. It will not be as smooth as keeping the y% to be 25. Now I will turn overflow hidden back to on. When the mouse cursor moves inside the button, we want to animate it. So that's why we are going to use the mouse enter event. Here we have our mouse enter event, and we are going to create a GSAP timeline. Okay, the timeline is created, but I'm going to keep it paused because we don't want the user to see the animation before they even hover over the button. This is our incoming animation. The blob will move from Y of 25% to negative 25%, which means a total of 50% in the upwards direction. We have a duration of 0.4 and a ease. Let me remove the overflow hidden, and then you will be able to see it better. As you saw, the top of the blob has reached the top of the button. I'm going to enable the overflow hidden again because we don't want to see this ugly mess. And then we are going to create the outgoing animation, which will push the blob even further up. Now the initial incoming animation moves by 50%. 25 minus 25 is equal to 50, and the outgoing animation is going to run double of that. It goes from 25 to 125, and that's why I'm also giving it 0.2 seconds more duration and a different ease. Why am I going to use Y percentage of minus 125 and not 100? I will just show you why. Disable the overflow hidden again. If we move it just by 100%, the bottom 25% of the blob is still inside the button. Now why is that? Because its original position is right in the middle. If you remember, we have top to be 50%. So if I move the blob to be 100% upwards, it will still have 50% of the button's width still remaining inside it. And that's why we are going to use minus 125. If the blob was the same size as the button, we would need to use 150 percentages. But because the blob is twice as big, 50 divided by 2 is 25, so we use minus 125. Now if I run this, the blob will move completely outside of the button. There we go. Now we want a way to pause the animation when the user has still his cursor inside the button. Because right now if I just hover over the button, the blob is running out of the button, and we do not want that. So for that we are going to add label. Now what we can do is we can use this timeline.toInto method to run the animation up until the step. Now let's see what it looks like. Works, right? But what if I hover again? Why is the blob moving from the top down? We want it to move from bottom to top, not from top to bottom. So essentially what's happening is our timeline is finished, and when we say timeline.twin2, it goes from 100% down to 50%, and then the mouse leaves, it goes back from 50 to 100. What we want is when the mouse enters, the animation should restart from 0. So we can use the progress method to specify that we want to restart the animation each time the mouse enters. Beautiful. But there is just one small change I would like to make. Thing is, when the user just hovers over our button very quickly, the animation takes too long to complete. We can make the animation faster when the user moves out of our button before the animation is completed. So we need to track the progress. We can do it by timeline.progress. We need to see if it reached the step yet. We can use the labels property of timeline and check if the animation has reached the step position. If it hasn't, the animation will speed up. But we want our animation to be of normal speed when it restarts. So we are just going to reset our time scale back to 1 on mouse enter, and it will create our beautiful background animation. Okay, let's move on to our magnetic animation. So what is the magnet animation exactly? What happens when you hover over the button? The button moves a certain x direction and in y direction until it reaches a point, and then it goes back to its original position. So that's why we have our two event listeners, the mouse move and the mouse leave. So first of all, we need to move our button to the x and y direction respective to our cursor. So now how will we get those values? For that, I have this getMagnet position values function. Well, it will return me an x and a y value. Bear with me and just ignore this calculation for now. I will explain it later. Let's first animate them. Our basic x and y animation is ready. Let's run this function. Our magnet is working. Now we need to animate the mouse leave. We just need to reset the button's position back to 0. Now our magnet button is working, but we haven't animated the two lines yet. So we are going to use an array to animate the content and the button. Now it does work, but I want the content inside our button to move a little bit less. So it creates a sort of a parallax effect. And we can do it very easily by using a modifier. I will name it content pool strength. It will determine how much our content will move inside our button. If I keep this 1, it will move the same as our button. And to assign these values, we can use GSAP's wrap method. Perfect. But this looks kind of ugly, so I'm just going to clean up the code. There we go. I've also thrown an easing here, but I forgot one last thing, that when we leave the button, it sort of jiggles back to its original position. It just doesn't ease back in. We can use the elastic ease to achieve the same effect. Now, the elastic effect is too sudden and we need to increase the duration. Now our animation is running smoothly. There is a slight problem here. If I move the cursor back in before the mouse leave animation has finished, the position of the button will reset. Check it out. It is weird. So what happens is the mouse leave animation is still running when we run another mouse move animation. So what happens is the mouse leave animation kind of overwrites the magnet effect. So we need to kill the mouse leave animation before we start new animations. So that's why you can use gsaps.kill twins. This will kill all of the previous animations the button is working on. We have no errors now and our button animation is complete. So the last thing that remains is, how did I get these x and y values? Let me explain. First, we need to get the mouse position. Now, what is the mouse position? It is essentially the position of the mouse cursor respective to the button. For now, I am going to disable both of these animations so I can explain it a little easier. Okay, the blob looks kind of funny because we disabled the blob animation, but whatever. The position is calculated from the top left corner. When the cursor is on the top left corner, both the mouse position X and the mouse position Y are 0. When the cursor moves to the rightmost point, the mouse position X will be equal to the width of the button. And when the cursor is moved down, the mouse position Y will equal to the height of our button. But we can't use those values because if I put the cursor in the center, the X and Y will both be of 50% of width and height. We can't use that for our magnet animation. So that's why we are going to subtract half of the width and half of the height from the X and Y positions. So what it means is that when our cursor is dead center, it will be 0, 0. Then if I move the mouse towards the right, it will go to a max of width by 2. And if I go to the left side, it will go to the negative width by 2 because we are subtracting it here. Now the maximum pull decides how long you can pull the button. A maximum pull of 1 will mean I can move the element width by 2 on the right side, width by 2 on the left side, height by 2 on the top side, and height by 2 on the bottom side if the maximum pull is 1. And that is too big of an area for our animation. So you want to limit how much you can pull or how long until it stops pulling. That's why we have the maximum pull. If I keep it to 0.1, it will only pull for a slight amount. That's up to you. You can customize however you want. Just make sure you don't do it too much or too little depending upon your needs. That was it for this video. On the next video, I'm going to create the menu.